Kalispera and welcome. My name is Maria Kosmakos, and the National Hellenic Society is proud to welcome you to another discussion honoring Women's History Month. The National Hellenic Society is a nonprofit that celebrates and perpetuates our rich Hellenic heritage. It is my great pleasure to turn it over to the moderator for this evening, Katerina Sokou, who will take over the program from here. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Hello, I'm Katerina Sokou. I'm Washington, D.C. correspondent for Greek media, Katharina and Sky TV, and also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. I am thrilled to be moderating this panel of 4 exceptional professionals, 3 Bostonians and 1 New Yorker. Among the 5 of us, I calculated that we hold 14 or 15 university degrees. So I urge you to check out our full bios at MyPorea. They all have fascinating careers in academia, in the private sector, and in public service. I should mention that this is, of course, an event of the NHS Boston Chapter, and as a Washingtonian myself, every time I find myself in Boston, I think that I should be visiting more often, given the wealth of intellectual capital there. Now, to prove the point, I would like to introduce our participants on our panel titled Greek American Women Navigating Global Careers. I hope that it will offer inspiration, food for thought for our community, as well as practical advice about managing life priorities and career paths. We will, as always, take it alphabetically. So I will start with Artemis Kohas, who studied psychology at Lafayette College and got her master's at New York University, worked as a guidance counselor after 9/11, caught the entrepreneurial bug, owned a masticha shop in New York, and founded her own PR agency where she brings together her expertise in communications, branding, and event production. Artemis, I believe you're joining us from Greece. Yeah, and you travel frequently there. What was the factor? Was that a factor when choosing your profession? I know it was for me.
Well, interestingly, not my initial psychotherapeutic profession, but obviously we're here speaking for, on a panel of Greek women for a Greek organization. It's very dear to my heart. I will share something that actually not a lot of people know, and that is that I caught the entrepreneurial bug for sure. Also, at that moment, my mother, who has Alzheimer's in a very late stage, was moving to Greece for the better climate, to be healthier, and so on. And so my sister and I started Mastika Shop, and it was a big part of that, feeling like, well, we're going to be spending more time in Greece with our mom and splitting time between Chios, which is where Mastika comes from and where we're from, and also running this business. So it was really like a bridge, and that was a pivotal moment for us. And I have spent every summer of my life in Greece, which I feel extremely grateful and privileged for. So I was working in the school system. So I guess that also was a little bit of like why I wanted to work in the school system, so I could have my summers. So yes, absolutely.
I'm mindful of introducing our whole panel. I would like to move, before I come back to you, to Natalia Linos, Dr. Natalia Linos. She's a 3 times Harvard University graduate. She's currently there too as the executive director of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights. She's a social epidemiologist. She led the UNDP's work on how climate change affects poor and marginalized communities, was speechwriter to the administrator of UNDP, and a science advisor to the New York City Health Commissioner. Most lately, of course, she also had her first experience of running for Congress during the 2020 elections. And Natalia, I asked you a similar question during your campaign. I will put it in a different way here. Growing up, did you ever imagine running for office in the US? And how did your career lead you to that decision?
Well, in 30 seconds or 2 minutes, it's difficult to answer. I'll say that I was always interested in public service. I've always been in that realm. I didn't expect a career in the private sector. So there was something always there, an interest in public speaking and being part of solutions. And I found myself at the UN pretty young. I entered through the exam process at 25 and was working for Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, as her speechwriter. And then for Rebecca Greenspan, the former Vice President of Costa Rica. So I had female role models from very young who basically said to me, you enjoy this. At some point you should run. So it was in the back of my head. But then COVID hit, and I was a scientist working in public health, and it felt like there was an urgency for people like me to run. I think had it not been this disastrous year, I don't know, maybe I would have waited till my kids were older, or maybe I would have been hesitant, but somehow I stepped up. But I have to say that it was the mentorship and that the female role models that I had in my early 20s that really shaped that potential. I knew that that was possible and that I could imagine that career.
If I may turn to Elaine Papoulias, who is the executive director of another Harvard University Center, that's the thing with Boston, made at the Gansberg Center for European Studies. It promotes interdisciplinary understanding of European history, politics, economy, and societies. And in addition to her career in academia, Elaine's professional experience also includes advisory, public affairs, communications, and analytical work for government agencies, political candidates, grassroots campaigns, not-for-profit institutions, as well as private companies. Elaine, you are responsible for the overall strategic planning, development, management, and administration of the center. Which part of your job did you enjoy the most, and which one were you most ready to do?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Katerina. And first, I want to thank the National Hellenic Society and Drake Barakis, especially for his initiative to bring us all together, and for Maria's hard work. It's really an honor and a pleasure, and especially to be with these wonderful group of women. It's really hard to pick one part of my job that I think is most exciting, but if I had to pick one, it's really working with students, because no two students are the same. I've been working in higher ed for 22 years, and every student brings their own unique experiences, backgrounds, interests. And I always say working at America's oldest university is an interesting place, but it's kept forever young by its students, and the diversity of their ideas and the excitement that they have for learning and growing. And that's what really always keeps me going and keeps it fascinating for me.
If I may turn to Elizabeth Prodromou for now, Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou, who's Associate Professor of Conflict Resolution at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and the faculty director and the faculty director of the Initiative of Religion, Law and Diplomacy. She's a graduate of both Tufts and Fletcher, and she also got her PhD in political science from MIT. She's co-president and World Council member in the Religions for Peace, and was a member of the US Secretary of State's Working Group on Religion and Foreign Policy during the Obama administration, while also a commissioner before that, and vice chair in the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. Now, Elizabeth, as a Greek American woman, did you find it hard rising to the top of the American religious freedom policy world, really, where you are currently situated?
Thank you, Katerina, and I echo Elaine thanking the National Hellenic Society and you, and also Maria for all of her hard work and just giving us the pure enjoyment of being able to talk to each other here today. So thank you for convening us. I think like everyone who's here today, I mean, I faced challenges, but also opportunities. And frankly, I just drew from the well springs of my upbringing, as corny as that may sound. I've had multiple careers, international banker, academic, diplomat, now academic. But my first career was where I think I learned the perseverance that has helped me to move in the professional spaces where I do. And that was as a pizza maker back in South Portland, Maine, the child of immigrants. And that's where I learned, I think, the most important lessons that have driven my career, especially when it comes to international religious freedom and human rights. And those lessons were about service, they were about excellence, and they were about truth and freedom. And those are all things that I learned serving people who bought our pizzas and who ate them and enjoyed them, and working side by side with my parents and learning the lessons of being immigrants, and also of our grandparents, the same thing. So those commitments of truth and freedom and human dignity, seeing that in every single person that I served and worked alongside of, those are the things that brought me to the work in international religious freedom and human rights.
You have succeeded beyond the narrow definition of the Greek American world, right? You've taken it further, I would argue. So is this fair to say? And what kind of, and if so, what encouraged you to do so? I mean, and we can start with Natalia, but please feel free to jump in.
So it's interesting, and I think my upbringing is sort of different because I am very much a Greek American, but I grew up in Greece. I was born in the U.S. to parents who were international students. I grew up in Greece, and I came to college at 17, to the U.S. And so I was always kind of, what we call a third culture kid, not really knowing where I belonged. And I found a home at the UN, a home where there were a lot of people who traveled. And, my first job out of college at 21 was in Beirut in Lebanon. But before that, I had spent the summer of, my sophomore year of college in Pakistan. And I don't think the majority of Greek American 18, 19-year-olds find themselves, in Pakistan or in Beirut or in Yemen or in Syria or in Thailand, or, this before I turned 30, I had traveled in many, many parts of the world. And yet I find myself as a mom of 3 kids, Leonidas, Alexandra, and Amalia, very much embracing, that cultural heritage. My parents grew up, we went to church every Sunday. I would, fast Wednesdays, Fridays, and, every other big holiday. And, I don't necessarily replicate that as a Greek American mom, but there is some comfort in knowing that heritage and really relying on that to understand. And so now I feel like I understand immigrants of any background better. I think I have a desire for tolerance. I'm at a center on health and human rights, and the focus right now for my work is on structural racism in the US. So a lot of anti-Black racism, which isn't, a lot of Greek Americans wouldn't be focused on that, but that is what I work on. And I think I am able to see racism in the US because of that upbringing, because it's, I'm not scared to name it for what it is. So I think I'm both very attached to my Greek heritage and very strongly so. We go back every summer, and my parents are still there, but also very much wanting to step aside and not be labeled as, the Greek American running for Congress. I was the epidemiologist running for Congress, who was also a Greek American, and got a lot of support from Greek Americans, including, Drake Bechrakis and others who I'm so grateful for.
I think, interestingly, I think on this panel, I'm the one who I sort of started completely outside of, the Greek community, and then sort of came back to the Greek community and sort of came back to myself. And the way that I started to, be a bridge, and stay outside is bringing a Greek product and Greek products, and now any other things Greek, Hellenism to the US, and sort of educating the world, the city, as much as possible on, what are these amazing things that Greece has to offer. And then beyond that, working with other organizations, now I work with the Hellenic Initiative also, in terms of like, working with the global Greek diaspora, which is not just, US based. A lot of our organizations are very sort of local, and we're like more global. So, and I think, I think I differ from everybody in that. And sometimes I actually wonder if I'm very cognizant not to shelter myself too much, not to be too in this Greek American society, to be able to keep being that bridge and sort of traveling both ends of that, because it's so important when we want to push our, ideals forward, when we want to educate people about, what's so wonderful about where we come from, and also the many issues that touch Greece. I mean, we have people here, who work for religious freedom, who work for humanitarian rights, and we have a refugee crisis in Greece. We have so many things that we want to communicate about, and so important that we are the vehicles to make sure that that happens, whether it's a product or an issue, a human rights issue. It's something that, we're all here as sort of agents of change, I think. I don't know if that answered your question.
I was wondering, Elaine, how do you manage this linkage or this bridging point?
Yeah, when I think back to when I would consciously contemplate what my career would be, I never really had something specific in mind. And I often envied people that knew that they wanted to be an engineer or a doctor or a teacher. I really didn't have such a finite definition of what inspired me. But what I did recognize is that I had a love of learning, a love of the world, a love of understanding how vast our differences are, and how that can be very unifying instead of polarizing. And I think that that love and sort of intellectual curiosity was definitely nurtured by my family. My parents were also immigrants from Greece, and I think listening to their stories of living through the Greek Civil War and World War II, and how deprived they were of things like education and learning, and how having those sorts of stories be part of my reality growing up made me appreciate education and embracing the world more and more. And I think one of my most formative experiences that helped nurture this global curiosity that I possess was an exchange program that I did in high school in the 1980s. Now I'm dating myself, but where I spent some time in Africa. And, you know, this was the dinosaur age, right? When there were no cell phones, there were really no landlines even. So I went to an American high school in Kinshasa, which was then Zaire and now Congo. And there really, I think I appreciate how diverse this world is. I put myself out of my comfort zone. I was somewhere alone without my family, and nothing was familiar at all. Nothing was what I was used to. And I also put myself in the shoes of being a minority in a country where I was really quite different. And I think that helped me really develop an empathy and an ability to think about how I can try to put myself in someone else's shoes and think about things from their perspective.
And I'd like to move on to Elizabeth as well for her take on how her heritage kind of shaped her profession.
I would say that I would start by sort of what I want to be when I grow up. You know, as Elaine said, I used to envy people who had this, you know, who knew exactly that where they wanted to go professionally. I can say what I wanted to be when I grow up. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, a priest, or a teacher. And since professional pathways 1 and 2 clearly, or, you know, either shut off to me or weren't easily accessible, I guess I landed on the third one. But I also appreciated growing up a couple of things. One is being treated as the Greek kid, you know, and sort of problematizing about where do I fit here or in Greece or in Cyprus, what that meant, and realizing soon that I didn't have to choose one or the other. That was a kind of moment of discovery and relief and liberation. But also realizing that, and I think at this moment when we are all thinking very purposefully about diversity and inclusion, that there are different ways of being seen as other. And I was fascinated by the fact that, you know, our own history as Greek Americans is a history of being other. And I think that led me to realize the significance of knowing one's history, people narrating you or you narrating yourself, and the kind of, you know, power and security that comes from narrating yourself. So knowing how Greek Americans struggled, you know, they were subjected to immigration and exclusion legislation that was written with Southern Europeans in mind to keep Greek Americans out because we didn't look like or were perceived to be different than others. That's a part of our history I think we really don't even know. So learning our history means we can, you know, help others with their own history and their own future. And listening to stories, as everyone else has said, you know, the kind of sacrifices that those who came before us made, and feeling a kind of responsibility to honor that sacrifice. And so learning and education became a way of sharing and understanding. And it also became a way of seeing the visible and invisible ways that people, and women in particular, but as Greeks around the world, the way we are included or excluded, and the way we can include others and make sure we don't exclude others. And just one quick footnote, the beauty of realizing that wherever you go on this planet, you can usually bump into a fellow Greek. I mean, everywhere I've traveled, from China to Saudi Arabia to Syria to Morocco. I mean, we could all go on and on. It's been interesting to bump into something or someone related to Hellenism. So learning to think in that local and global way, I think, has been really exciting as a woman who respects and draws on our heritage.
You're touching 2 points here. That one, I want to share this imperative of narrating your own story as a journalist. I feel that as a Greek journalist in the States and amid the Greek debt crisis, I also felt the inclination, and the one-way street of this being what I needed to do at this point of time, this being the story of our lives, defining us, and hence I stayed a bit longer than initially expected in North America. But other than that, you mentioned also the tradition, and I want to ask you, because the Greek American and the Hellenic heritage, the tradition and religion have played a key role for the diaspora and the Hellenic diaspora in America and throughout the world. Arguably in Greece less so, because maybe they don't feel the need to as much as the people in the diaspora do. But should we aim to redefine those cultural links to become more inclusive, you think, as this community, to a younger, more diverse generation, to more women, to Philippines, to Greece proper? Do you have any ideas about this? Or personal experiences?
I'll jump in first. And I've had some conversation with Elizabeth, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, about the role of women in Greek American. I mean, I think it gets confused, the religious versus what is patriarchy, and what is patriarchy because we're Greek American, or what is patriarchy because there is sexism in the world. And at times it's difficult to disentangle, what is it and where's your identity? And, for those in the audience who are young women, I think maybe a message from all of us is that you may have to take some risks, and that it's not a homogeneous, Greek American women aren't homogeneous, and you can step out in different ways, and you're not going to necessarily, it might feel like a huge risk, but you will find a Greek American woman on the other side, whatever those politics are. You might be very progressive, like I was. I ran a campaign that was tremendously progressive on a lot of issues, and yet found a lot of Greek American women who were willing to support me. But say I was a very religious and felt a certain way, there would be other women there. So somehow breaking down that narrative of us being one block and allowing that freedom, I think it's really important. I personally, I studied anthropology as my first degree. I think there's a lot of value to understand your culture, to understand your history, to embrace the parts of it that are meaningful, but to not feel confined by it, to not feel that means that if you do something different, that you can't claim that identity. You still have the right to be a Greek American woman, whether or not you fit the stereotypes. And I think all of us here share some commonalities, but we're probably very different too. And I think we can all claim that title. But I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want, you were really helpful during my campaign, sort of talking me through how to engage with Greek American women and the Greek American community and the religious community.
Well, and I do hope you'll run again, as Katerina said at the beginning, and we'll all be there with you. I think one of the most important things we can all do is to reach out to each other. There is a lot of patriarchy with a small p. There's a lot of patriarchy in American and Greek society in general, but there's a lot of patriarchy within our community, however we may define that, in terms of religion or in terms of our ethnicity and heritage. but there are people, who recognize that, I think. I mean, I was at the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church on Crete, and there were only a handful of us women who were on the delegations. And that was a very interesting experience with both a positive and a negative valence. But I was there because, those who are the decision makers were committed to making sure there was at least some, female presence there. And that's heartening. And I think it's important to look for the positives, because it's very easy to get discouraged at times. But I think reaching out to other women is really, really important. And our daughter's 22, Sophia, and I always tell her, look for other women that you can reach out to. People want to help. Most people want to help, and they want to, help you move forward. So don't be afraid to take risks. And, I always remember what my mother told me growing up. You can be whatever you want to be. She would always say that to me. And I felt so fortunate that she told me that. Sometimes I'm sure she regretted telling me that, but I think that's really important. Don't be fearful to imagine. And there's somebody that can, help you realize what you're imagining. And then on the diaspora thing, that's a term that is, I think, it means many different things to many people, but growing up, I remember sort of that tension of, feeling like, okay, I'm a Greek American, and how do Greeks of Greece see me? And then when I'd be in Greece, I would feel completely comfortable, but I know other Greek Americans wouldn't, and the language issue would be a barrier. I think, having a global view about what it means to be, Greek American, and where your faith may fit is the best way to come at that. Not to think in terms of either or binaries, because that's a formula for missing out on the fullness of what diaspora really can mean.
That I think absolutely. I like what Natalia said, that we have to sort of, the important thing is to know about your history. And Elizabeth said that also, and sort of know who you are and know where you came from. And I think in any house that you grow up in, any ethnic home, in any immigrant home, there's a thread here about feeling other. There's a thread here about feeling like an immigrant, where that makes you sort of, we as Greek Americans understand each other. And so there's that comfort zone of Greek America. And then there's also that, Greek American women are expected to be a certain way. But that also runs across other ethnicities and immigrant populations and in the global world, as Elizabeth was saying. So I think the important thing in agreement is about knowing your history and knowing that it's okay to go against the grain. I was raised very, very traditional, and often felt like, I often felt like either I had to become, go down the family path, or to completely resist it, and reject it and be something else completely. And it's not black or white or polarizing, and you can sort of figure things out as you go. And I think that, like, when Elaine said that she didn't know what she was going to be, and I'm not sure, I probably wanted to be an actress, but at every moment you sort of think, what's next? And you can just keep following your heart and what feels right for you. And my identity is really important to me. Obviously with a name like Artemis, it's not very easy to hide, that I'm Greek. But we've come such a long way, as Elizabeth said, because, with a name like Artemis, or a Greek last name, I mean, think about how many generations before us had to change their last name so they weren't discriminated against, or think about how many women couldn't even do the things that, the women on this panel are doing today, because they were only allowed to be, nurses and caregivers. So I think we've come a really long way. Our, heritage is extremely important to all of us, and that's why we're here. And we would definitely want to educate the next generation and the world at large about, Hellenism. So I don't want to reject that at all, but to be sort of kinder and more loving about it, and make the boundaries and sort of the preppy, what you're supposed to be like, all those sort of judgments and stereotypes and criticisms, like a much more softer, or disappear completely. That I'd be good with that.
The one thing that has been my experience, and I don't know if this is even relevant for younger generations of Greek women today, because America has changed so much, and Greek America has changed so much since the time I was in my 20s and teens. But I think growing up, having my Greek heritage was both empowering and constricting and confining at some moments. And it took a while to feel comfortable knowing that I could define myself as I wanted, as can everybody in the world. And if I want to put a label on myself, whether that be Greek American or Italian American or Bostonian or whatever, is my prerogative. And I won't let anyone else define me. And I think it took a long time to feel comfortable enough in my own skin to really feel comfortable kind of stepping out and taking a path that maybe wasn't as conventional as other Greek American contemporaries. And yeah, I mean, and just to echo what Elizabeth said about meeting Greeks everywhere, the more Greeks that you meet, the more you realize that you do share certain cultural bonds, but there's great diversity in our community. And you know, that's why from the outset, I recommended that we take ourselves out of our own environments, because when we do, we realize that our norm isn't the norm writ large. And that helps, I think, empower you to really choose your own path and blaze your own trails and feel more and more confident in your own skin.
I remember us talking a bit, and Elizabeth also mentioned it earlier, the importance of mentoring and support networks. In your own career and your own experience, how important was this mentoring part in you reaching your current positions? And do you think that, did you find it within the Greek American?
Well, if I have to think about my top mentors, they were not in the Greek American community. They were mostly around my psychotherapeutic work. I've definitely found a lot of collaborators and partners in the Greek American community. Maybe I haven't sought out enough mentors in the Greek American community, but it didn't, maybe it's more, I don't know, it seems difficult to me in some way. And maybe the other panelists feel will have something else to share. But for me, it was not, and it's maybe unfortunate. But they were women who were my mentors and who I definitely still keep in touch with and have a wonderful relationship with. But there is definitely, I have a lot of partners and collaborators in the Greek American community.
Yeah, I would say that I have, I've benefited from influencers in my life that probably I didn't even realize how influential they were until much later. Of course, growing up in your immediate family, your parents, but I came from a family of very strong women, and my mother immigrated to the U.S. when she was 15 on her own, without her family. She left her family behind to come and live with extended family that she had never met in a country she'd never been to. She didn't speak English. And I think just having her be such a strong role model was an influence in my life that I think I appreciate more and more every day. I have benefited from wonderful role models in academia. One of them is on this panel. I mean, I remember first meeting Elizabeth Prodromou as a student myself, and just being so floored and wowed and inspired by her intellect. And she's been a huge mentor and source of inspiration for me. I have had many mentors outside of the Greek community, also many of them men, you know, helping me understand what I'm good at, what I need to improve upon. And similar to Elizabeth's experience, having a lot of people telling me that you can be whatever you want to be and you can do anything. And as I get older, I think the thing that you come to the realization that yes, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And maybe that's a conversation for another Zoom. But I think that also has helped to shape my perspective and my sense of accomplishment.
I grew up in a household, I consider it a feminist household, and I know my dad is watching. And, you know, we were 4 girls, and then we have a younger brother too. And my mom, who is also a professional. And I think it is important to call out men who are feminists, who actually do tell you you can do whatever you want and who inspire you. But I would say my mentors are my sisters. I mean, it sounds so silly, but peer mentors, whether they're people you went to school with and college with. And for us, you know, for the 4 girls, we're all in public service or academia. So we actually really, truly support each other in very, very serious ways. But sharing, like Artemis, my professional mentors have not been Greek American women, but that's because, you know, as the topic of this discussion, it's global. You know, I have had a global career, and so there weren't necessarily those opportunities. And in the UN system, sadly, there are very few women. I think there was 1 woman, Greek woman, a director. There are a handful, you know, whereas there are others from other nationalities and other, you know, places. So I think we do need to talk about the structure, the fact that there aren't that many Greek American women in very senior positions. And I mean, Elizabeth, you have inspired clearly a generation. You know, even before we started this call, Artemis was talking about a friend of hers, Elaine, me, you know, so clearly the more women who become leaders in the Greek American community, the more hopefully that mentorship can happen. But it does take a generation first to make it, and then to open the door for everybody else.
And it takes some advocacy, I should add, on our behalf to try to push this forward, because it's lagging behind, frankly. I mean, seeing again all your academic accomplishments, you know, going through your bios, everyone's bios, you know, it's striking, right? And it should be represented on higher levels as well of community leadership and representation. Elizabeth, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would love to jump in. First of all, I send a huge hug to Elaine for, you know, just your kindness. I mean, what you say, it's really, it's super humbling. And also for Artemis, I mean, our conversation before, I also guess I'm old enough now that I can be referred to in this way. So I don't know, I'll have to sort of spend some time working through that. But I would say that, as everyone else had said, most of my professional mentors have not been from within the Greek American community. And I think being aware of that has made me especially committed to being available to mentor other Greek American young women. You know, the people who have shown growing up the most confidence in me outside of my family and who have inspired me really were not from our community. And and that, I think, is something that we're all committed to changing. But I would also say that there were a lot of influencers, and also in my family. I mean, I remember the phrase growing up, "Τι θα πει ο κόσμος?" What are people going to say? You know, that was like ingrained in my, you know, in my mind before I even really understood the fullness of what that implied. And I remember my grandmother, you know, who came here when she was 11 years old and, you know, had no education. And she would say that. And I remember the big breakthrough when I got her to wear navy blue instead of black, you know. I mean, I remember that. I remember where we were sitting. I remember the context, and, you know, and that was like, okay, who cares what people are going to say? I'm going to wear a navy blue dress instead of a black dress. And so those small things, they have a huge impact. So, you know, we shouldn't dismiss those little revolutionary moments, because they're liberating moments about becoming, you know. And you know, I grew up as a tomboy. I played basketball, I varsity lettered, and tennis and basketball, and I was always out rough and tumble with the boys in our neighborhood playing sports. And And so I kind of learned early on it's okay to sort of do your own thing, but don't be afraid to be a disruptor. That's what I learned from influencers. And think about who our audiences are. Because I've learned it's easier to, in some ways, be a disruptor outside of our community than it is inside our community. And so speak and disrupt away. That's my message to any young women who are watching. And reach out to other influencers or disruptors, because that's what it's about, to become who you really are. And that's the way we can give back to our own community, by being positive disruptors. I think that's just really, really important, and have some humor while we're at it, because humor, as I don't know, whatever classical theorist said it, but humor is a mark of intelligence, and it's a mark of sort of self-reflection. And it also is a great comfort when you need it. So be a disruptor, be humorous, and also look to other Greek American women when it seems that our own space is more constraining than it should be.
So be the change. Elaine, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I also think it's very empowering and useful to revisit moments in your life that were formative. And when you reflect back, sometimes you see those moments and you understand how much they really propelled you forward. And for me, it's really helped me appreciate those people, but it's also helped me understand how very small gestures and being communicative with others can really help them have these confidence building moments, which cumulatively really can be quite impactful. I mean, I'll never forget, I went to a public high school in a working class town outside of Boston, and I was on the tennis team. And the coach of the tennis team was a couple years older than me, and she was really smart, and she went to an Ivy League school, and I was really in awe of her academic accomplishments and really felt like she was in a league that, of her own. And I never forget when she came back came back home for a winter break and called upon me to just see how I was doing. She was a mentor on the tennis team, but just also kind of a big sister figure. And not someone that I would confide in or was very close to, but she encouraged me to think about going and applying to schools that I would have maybe never applied to as a high school student. And she kept saying, well, I'm at Dartmouth, and those students are no different than the students in our high school. And in thinking back to that at the time, it gave me it gave me pause. And it was a simple discussion, but it was important. And that's why I think taking the time to think about those things for all of us give us the inspiration to reach out and want to mentor, as Elizabeth and Artemis and Natalie have also mentioned, younger generations, and be helpful in ways maybe that we haven't found in our own community.
If I may, I'd like to ask you a more personal question to you all about the biggest impediments that you found during your career path so far. I mean, there's obviously Me Too. We live in the era of Me Too, and we're very aware these days of sexism and, of course, sexual harassment. And but also, choosing to have a family while having a career as well, and navigating, managing that as well. I would like to ask for your personal perspective, to the extent that you're willing to share with us. How was that for you?
I'm happy to go first on both of those issues. I think they're important to address them. I think on the sexual harassment piece, as a young professional at the UN, I think I joined when I was 25, 26. I faced a lot of it. I saw it. I was harassed. I saw others being harassed. But the biggest impediment to my career was wondering if I was getting attention at meetings because of what I was saying, or because I was like, the young woman in the room that the men wanted to pay attention to. And that was really hard for me to sort out. what I did, and what I do advise others, is I ended up finding and working for women. And that kind of opened up. And then I knew that I was good at my work. And it wasn't some strange dynamic that I wasn't being kind of groomed. And, it was hard. And it's hard in these environments where all your bosses are men and they're paying attention to you and you're confused and you don't know, is it because? And I say that because you might find yourself in that situation. I don't think we're over that era. I mean, this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But professionally, as a young woman, like knowing how good I was, it took me a while. And I sound arrogant, but you need to engage in it. You need to claim it. I am good at these things, and I'm really bad at these other things. I know very well what my limitations are. I still don't know how to use Excel. I've been, trained a million times. Like, there are things that, I know about myself. I think that the layering of the sexual harassment when you're trying to find what you're good at is really hard in the workplace. Now the family piece, I have been really lucky. I am a mom of 3 kids, a 7-year-old and 3-year-old twins. And luckily it hasn't prevented me from getting ahead, but I know that that is luck. I know that that is not the experience of every woman. I know that that is not, I don't take it for granted, but I do, it was interesting, a student actually recently, she said to me, I didn't know if I could have a family, but you have been a role model. It was an International Women's Day. She sent me a note and she said, it's so wonderful because of COVID, my kids are more present, like they'll show up in my lap, they'll be doing things. So she said, you've normalized something for me. And so I'm excited about that. And again, I haven't answered the question, and I think it's the industry. Some industries, maybe it's much, much harder. And Katerina, not to put you on the spot, but you haven't shared a lot. You are, our best journalist in, Greek American journalist. I'd love to hear your perspective too of the career. I feel like you've been asking us all questions too. So please also share.
Can I just jump into, Natalia, thank you for asking that, because I was going to ask Katerina the same thing. And I just want to add, in a field that's still very male dominated in Greece. I mean, when you pick up any respectable newspaper in Greece, especially the opinion bylines, they're overwhelmingly male.
Thank you for putting me on the spot here. I get that yes, it is a male-dominated field, journalism. Less so these days compared to when I started 20 years ago. Certainly on the top spots of managing editor, of director of news, these positions are still very much male dominated, and to a very large extent, as a result, the news that we produce in Greece are very much male dominated too. At the same time, I believe right now there are certainly in Katerina, I think that you will find more women's bylines, not necessarily the commentary, but the reporting than men's. So this has been changing as well. But yes, it is a very male-dominated factor. And at my early days in the profession, yes, I was very much tempted to leave it because of all the sexual harassment going on at the time. But I didn't. I was determined to become a journalist, and it's something that that if anything, you want to protect younger women from facing the same challenges, and it's mostly psychological, right? I mean, unless, of course, there's a major sexual attack or rape or something like that, the psychological effect of finding your space once you've been sexually harassed professionally is very hard to manage, and it takes a lot of maturity and courage and self-awareness to get there, to reclaim your spot, right? Yeah. So I think this is something that with more women shaping the news and with more women writing the news, we will have less of. Yeah. But Elizabeth, you want to go next?
Yeah, I would love to follow up on all of you, and thank you for sharing your experiences too in the profession, in your profession in journalism. I think that something Natalia said is so important. Don't be afraid to acknowledge to yourself and sort of speak how good you are. again, there's the fine line between sort of modesty and humility on the one hand, and pride and arrogance on the other. And I think Natalia captured it perfectly. I mean, embrace how good you are. I think that that's very, very important, because particularly for mentoring and certainly for family life, it's really important to show that and demonstrate that being happy with how you are, that's a sign of healthfulness, and one shouldn't apologize for one's strengths and accomplishments, while also recognizing and always trying to be reflective on where we can be better. Regarding the issue of sexual harassment, I said I had a short happy career in international banking. I mean, every day was an experience in that. And I think what most of us probably recognize is that it's not the big, bold events, but it's those corrosive, incremental, small, events and violations that are they're corrosive, and they're difficult to manage, and they're also difficult to sort of state. But I think it's really important, again, to reach out to others and to share the experience, because there's strength in that. And then finally, around family, I've said this to all of you. My husband will be canonized, I know. I mean, I am extremely fortunate, and I'm blessed, and to be a mother as well. To me, that's the greatest gift in my life. But having a family and being a wife and a mother, I feel like every day makes me strive to be a better human being, and it's made me better in my professional life, because it's also taught me that life is about relationships. And with the smallest to the biggest of things, we affect those around us. And certainly in the work that I do in human rights and as an academic, that smallest of gestures can mean the biggest of things. And I think Artemis mentioned that as well. So I feel really, really gifted that I'm challenged every day that way to sort of look myself in the mirror. Anyway, I'll stop there. I could go on, but I won't.
Around the question, I feel like, obviously there's sexual harassment, there's, comments about how you look, or, all those kinds of things. Me working in events, a lot of times it's night, you're out, maybe there's drinks, there's all kinds of other things, there's clients. So things happen, and you have to learn sort of quickly how to handle them. I think sometimes we brush them under the rug and pretend like it's okay, and it's not okay. And that's where we come in sort of to help each other. And what Elizabeth was saying is when I become sort of it took me a long time to become woke to these things, because it's just sort of accepted. And I don't want to, I hate to say it, but in the Greek American community, it's very accepted, and the patriarchy runs very deep. So in some way that gave me anyway, a thicker skin about things. But when I became woke, I started noticing, well, would that person in a meeting interrupt me if I was a man? Would this man talk over me? Would they dismiss that sort of idea that I brought to the table that was a really good idea? As when you own that, that stuff gets really hard once you start seeing it to let it go. And then, what Katerina said, to sort of claim your space and, claim your voice. And if you're the only woman in the room, it becomes even harder. And I think, in terms of children, I don't have any, but I've been a caregiver most of my life. And, as women, we get the brunt of caregiving, whether it's children, whether it's our parents, whether it's other family members. And, one of my favorite quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I'm sure we all love, is that, women will achieve true equality when the men, in the world help, equally bring up the next generation. So, I think it's a global issue that we have. And most women that I know that are very successful have a man, as Elizabeth said, who should be canonized by their side. So I think, and one of the things we talked about in our previous conversation is we need the men. We need the men to, be part of the women's movement. We can't do everything at the same time, as Elaine said, feminism isn't do everything. because that's more like, not one person can't possibly do everything. It's more about being able to do what you want at the time that you can do it. And, I really want to also thank everybody that's on this panel, because here we are, we're present for this moment and for these little things that we can give people, and sort of making it okay for whoever's watching this to please reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever you want. Because it is those little moments, like Elaine said, Elizabeth said, that we don't know how we're impacting people. And just the fact that we're here and talking about these things is impacting a lot of people. So thank you for, letting me be part of it and sort of go on longer than maybe I thought I would initially.
I'll be very brief because I know we're running out of time, but in terms of obstacles, I think for me, I was my own biggest obstacle, I think, at one point and at different points. And the other challenging thing at certain points in my career were really the lack of female role models. Myself being not having enough recognition, as Elizabeth alluded to, in the things that I could do well, and always kind of having this glimpse of, imposter syndrome still kind of lurking always in the back of my mind. But in those moments, I would think about one of my undergraduate professors who I took a class in African American literature and music. It was of real interest to me, but it was outside of my major, and I felt like I really didn't know enough to participate in class. And at one point, he asked me directly for my thoughts on something, and I didn't feel qualified to share an opinion. And he said to me, "No one gives you a voice, and no one will ever give you a voice." And I remember that always, and I have said that to my daughter, who's 12, from the time that she could really understand what I was saying. And, at those moments when I really had challenging moments in my career where I felt overwhelmed and I felt that I was failing or flailing, to look around and not see other women in positions in my immediate environment, that was challenging. And that sometimes made me think, well, maybe there aren't any other women here for a reason. Maybe we just shouldn't be here. Maybe it's too hard. And it was at those moments that I looked outside of my immediate environment to, family, friends in other sectors for inspiration.
Katerina, do you mind if I follow up briefly on Elaine?
Please.
I think that since we're here talking about Hellenism and, there's the spillover to Orthodoxy as well, they're separate but oftentimes related. My experience is that perhaps I just was in a bubble, but, I was not really, I've not been nervous or intimidated about, participating in professional environments that seem completely out of reach when you're a kid and looking at the world. So, if I as I made my educational path, as I, did my professional work, and, if you're dealing with an ambassador or a head of state or, whatever it may be, I've not been intimidated by that. I've known that I had to be excellent and had my A game on, but I believed I could do that. The places where I have found that are very male dominated are in terms of the most kind of intimate spaces of our heritage and our faith. And I think it's especially important. Those are intimate spaces where I think, whether we know it or not, we have expectations that there will be acceptance, there will be encouragement, there will be support. And when it's not there, I think it's really important to speak about it, because that experience, I think, is very, very undermining. It's damaging, and it can lead people to be silent or lead people to turn away. And I think we're all on this screen because we've not done that. We've embraced who we are. But I think that these are the spaces of Hellenism or Orthodoxy where it's really important, particularly when it comes to decision making, for women to be part of the conversation and the decision, not just be part of the performance. I think that's very, very important. And I think especially for young women, that's a lesson that I would say take away with you. Ask for use your voice. Don't expect someone else to give it to you. As Elaine said, her professor said, no one's going to give you your voice. We have to use our voice, and don't be afraid to speak it, because otherwise a lot of times you won't be allowed to. And don't wait for permission. You have the same right and also the same responsibility as the men in the room, and you should be able to get in the room too.
If I may, we have a related follow-up question for you from the audience on Facebook. They're asking, I don't know the name, what is the church without women? Time to have the role of deaconess back in our church, as well as archons, which Patriarch Athinagoras had introduced, with 7 women serving in that role. Do you think that would be an answer?
Yeah, I think that, so the Archbishop Elpidoforos recently to start National Women's Month, did a wonderful message and was very encouraging about women. And he said, the greatest sort of cosmological event, this is my language, not his, but the greatest cosmological event in history was the birth of Christ. And without a woman, there would have been no birth. So whatever context one puts it in, I think that's a profound statement, and I agree with it. And that's something we need to remember. And it's not like something to be put in a sort of a space or an icon only. The icon is supposed to be a way that we access the divine, and it's supposed to be a way that we can imagine transfiguration. And so for the church, I deal a lot, my work is at the intersection of religion and geopolitics, and that includes the Orthodox Church as well as others. I'm dealing with, religious figures that are largely male, no matter what faith tradition you're in. And I think it's absolutely crucial for women to have a voice and women to be part of the decision-making structure. And that's where knowing history matters, because if we know our own history, we know the absolutely crucial role of women in all faith traditions, and certainly in the church, including with, female archons, archodices, including with deaconesses, etc. So knowing history is really important when we hear that, well, that's not part of our history. If you know your history, you will know that women are always and have been and should be part of all of these features of the church and all of these aspects of the church.
Thank you for your response, and thank you, ladies. Thank you for exceptional women who joined us today, and Drake Paroukias and the National Health Society brought together for this event. If I may just offer a couple of takeaways that we discussed for our audience: the importance of mentoring and support networks and seeking them out. Another key theme was the common thread of venturing out of your comfort zone. We kind of all shared a similar rite of passage experience to becoming our own women through travel at a young age. And last but not least, having a strong vote to our heritage. But we define Hellenic identity on our own terms, whatever that is for us, for our religion, be it our religion, our culture, our language, our connection to Greece itself. So this, I think, it would be one of our key messages to our younger viewers and to our community leaders to not think of the Hellenic identity as monolithic, but being more inclusive and flexible. Thank you very much, Maria. Over to you.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I just wanted to pop on and say, if you missed our previous NHS Boston Chapter celebrating Women's History Month, you can go check that out on nationalhellenicsociety.org. Thank you again once for your time, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katerina.
Thank you.